Okay, so we're going to do frequency tables and histograms today, which are in our last module of the class, which is our probability and statistics module. This is about halfway through the module, maybe a little further, so we're almost done. But again, if you're not quite there, it's okay. You do have until May 29th to finish the class. But you can finish earlier if you want. And some of you are almost done. I know, was that Riley, you were saying you're almost ready for the semester test. So you can work ahead. You can finish whenever you want to, as long as you're done by the 29th. Okay. So the first thing we're going to do, instead of me just teaching you what they are, today we're going to actually make them, because I think we can find some fun ways to make frequency tables and histograms. So some interesting stuff that we can talk about and learn from each other. So let's make a frequency table first, which is a table that lists the frequencies of some event. Okay, so it's a table of number values. So let's think of, my baby's crying. Let's think of an example of data that we could collect that we're all interested in, and we can kind of pick one from the list. So some things that I thought of before class started for us to maybe pick were your favorite types of pets, and that actually came up in the chat earlier, and that was just, that was funny because I didn't plan that. So we could do a frequency table of all of our favorite types of pets and just get a few examples, or we could do a frequency table of your favorite subject in school, or anything else. Does anybody have any ideas or want to vote on one of those that you'd like to do?
I say the favorite pets.
Okay, I like that one too. Does everybody think that would be fun? Do a frequency table of our favorite pets?
Yeah,
Perfect. Pets. Or favorite animal. It doesn't really have to be a pet, but favorite animal. Let's do that. Okay, so I'm going to type to make this faster. So let's say, let me make a table here. So animal and frequency. So some that I've already seen in the chat were cats, guinea pigs, dogs, dogs, fish, bunnies, oops, so rabbits, let's see, horses, goats.
Chickens.
Okay, let's do chickens, and we're going to stop there just so that we don't get too many where we don't have enough to put any numbers in besides 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, right? Okay, so let's just use this list, and everybody type in the chat. If you've already typed, type it again so that I can keep up. That'll go under the fish. So type in the chat what your favorite is, and I'll start typing in some or doing some tally marks. We got cats, horses, bunnies. So cats, horses, rabbits, horse, cat, dog, goats, guinea pig, dog, cats and rabbits. I'm just going from what I'm seeing in the chats. Guinea pigs, dogs, horses, guinea pig, dog, goats. I like that, goats for life. I think goats are funny, they're cute. All right, I'm caught up. Any more? Fish. Another horse. Another fish. Chickens. Here we go. We didn't want to leave chickens out. Oh, we got 2 chickens. Nice. Dog. Cats. Horse. I already got that, cats. No, I didn't. That's a different one. There we go. And cats. All right. Sweet. Okay, so I think some of us voted twice, and that's fine. This is just for us to kind of get a good idea. So if you're adding up the numbers and they don't add up to how many people are in here, it's okay. All right, this is just for fun. But just for us to also see an example of one and how to make one. So this is a frequency table, but so far I've just done tally marks, which is fine. You can look at it with tally marks, or you can count your tally marks when you're done and write the actual numbers. Okay, so if we wanted to, we could also go back and say the numbers out beside it. So if we count our tally marks for cats, we have 5. 2 people like guinea pigs the best. 4 people like the dogs. 2 like fish. 2 like rabbits. 5 like horses. 2 like goats, and 2 like chickens. So we've got a tie for favorite animal between cats and horses, which is surprising. I kind of thought dogs would be the most. But that's one benefit to making these frequency tables, because sometimes we think in our head we already know what something's going to look like with data or with some certain situation. But once we actually survey or find some data and collect it and then map it or make our diagrams, we can see that maybe it's not what we thought, and we might be surprised. Okay, so this is our frequency table. Typically what you would do is you would start with a certain number. So I would have said, okay, I'm starting with 35 students, or however many I'm going to sample. And then I would put down all of their favorites, for this case, favorite animals. And then that number would have to add up to that total number that I sampled. Okay. But in this case, we were just doing it for fun. So again, I just kind of wanted to get some information. So that is a frequency table. A histogram is different. It's more like a graph. You've probably seen, have you seen bar graphs before, or remember looking at those or talking about those before? It looks a lot like a bar graph. There's very little difference between a histogram and a bar graph, but the difference is important. Okay, so let's talk about those differences real quick. I'm going to go ahead and put an example of both side by side so that we can see the difference. Okay, so I'm going to put the bar graph here and a histogram here. And I'm not going to like put a whole lot of data on the axes. I'm just going to kind of show you the difference in what they look like. Okay, so a bar graph, typically you'll see different bars. Whoa, that's not what I wanted. Here we go. So you'll have some sort of data marking on the bottom. This isn't working. Ah, there we go. So I'm going to lay my computer down so I can write on it easier. Just one second. All right, so on the bar graph, you would have some different levels of bars shaded in, maybe different colors. This is not pretty, but it's just to get the general idea across. Okay, so let's say this is our example of a bar graph. Okay, so we would have some data markings down here, like maybe this is 5, 10, 15, whatever the data is we're looking at. Okay, the difference in a bar graph and a histogram is that we're still going to have bars in our histogram, but they're going to be connected because they're going to be interval ranges on the bottom instead of just a solid numerical value down here. Okay, so instead we're going to have interval ranges. So maybe it's 0 to 5 for the first interval, and 6 to 10 for the second, and 11 to 15 for the third. So our bars are going to look different because they're going to be connected. So if this is our first interval, it would be like this. What's wrong, buddy? And our second one would be next to it. And then the last one would be like this. So see how there's no gaps between the bars this time? Yeah, so since they're intervals, they have to kind of line up next to each other so that there's no gap, because there's no gap in the values, right? It goes from 5 straight on to 6. That looks like it says 670, but it's 610, 6 through 10. Okay, so that's the difference between, or the main differences between a bar graph and a histogram. So let's go ahead and do an example of a histogram. And this is one that I kind of made before class because it was a lot of data to go through and I knew we wouldn't have time to all do it together. So Here is my frequency table. I started with a frequency table so that I could turn it into a histogram. So do y'all remember last week, those of you that were here, when we talked about circle graphs or pie charts? So last week we talked about pie charts. So what I did was I went into the grade book and I looked at everybody that had taken the quiz from that lesson. Okay, not everybody's taken it, but everybody that has taken it, I tallied up their scores. So I put some interval ranges for scores here. So see how my first column is percent scored on the quiz, and then my frequency out beside it. So I have 4 intervals. First one is 0 to 25%. Second interval is 26 to 50%, then 51 to 75%, and then 76 to 100%. So those are my interval ranges for the percent scored on the quiz, that one specific quiz. And what I did was everybody that had taken it, I put a tally mark next to the score interval of what they made on that quiz. So that's what I did. I went through the whole grade book, and as you can see, there were a lot of you that have taken it already. So it took a while for me to get all the data. That's why I did it before class, but that's what I did. Tallied up all the scores in the correct interval. And so again, to take it from a frequency table to a histogram, it would be easier for us to go ahead and count up those tally marks and make the numerical values. So if I counted up for the first interval 0 to 25%, the tally marks, I would see 12. Okay, so 12 people scored between 0 and 25% on the pie charts quiz or circle graphs quiz. All right, then my second interval, 26 to 50%, if I count that, 5, 10, 15, 16 people scored somewhere in between 26 and 50%. And then my next interval was 51 to 75%. So if I count that, 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 31 people scored between 51 and 75%. And then my last one, 76 to 100, 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35, 40, 45, 50, 55, plus 4, which would be 59. So we had a lot of people score between 76 and 100%, which is great. And if we look at the majority, this would be something helpful for me to see the data on a specific quiz to see, okay, we need to review that quiz. If a lot of people didn't get a good score on it, or if the majority did not score well, then I would say, okay, this is something we need to go back over, or maybe I need to set up some time with certain people, make a group class, to go over this lesson. This would be really beneficial for me to set up this data this way. But if I look at these scores, I can see that the majority of us so far have definitely passed and understood that quiz. Okay, because 51 to 100%, if I added those up, I'd get a lot more than the ones that were 12 and 16 or 0 to 50%. But that doesn't mean that I don't need to kind of reach out and make sure that some of us are not needing help, but just to kind of get a broad overview. So this is my frequency table. Now I'm going to turn it into a histogram. So I went ahead and made my histogram graph, and I just brought the table data back down here so that I could see it easier. Let me find my scroll bar to get this in a better view. All right, so down on the bottom, I've set up my intervals, 0 to 25%, 26 to 50%, 51 to 75%, and 76 to 100%. And then on the y-axis, or over here on the left, I've set up data markings for the frequencies. Okay, so this is my frequency. Oh gosh, it's moving. It's hard to write on this one, it's sitting straight up. But anyway, that's the frequency over there. So I'm going to create my histogram by putting in some bars here. So if I look at my data table that I brought down here, just so I wouldn't have to go back up and down over and over, I see that for the 0 to 25%, there were 12 students that scored within that range. So I'm going to go up to where 12 would be. So I've got 10 and 15, so it's going to be a little bit under halfway between there. And this would be my first interval bar there for my histogram. Okay. Then my 26 to 50%, there were 16 people. So I'm going to go a little bit above 15 here for my next interval to make 16. Because I went by 5 so that I could fit more on my screen since my data went up pretty high. Okay, then the 51 to 75%, there were 31. So I'm going to go a little bit above 30 up here. Make that. And then lastly, for 76 to 100%, I'm going to go to 59, so right under my 60 marking. And then shade that in. So this would be my histogram for this data for the number of students who scored certain ranges on the circle graphs quiz. Does that make sense? Yeah. I think it's pretty cool too. So it's only a little bit different than bar graphs. Again, the main difference here are these intervals down on the bottom. Instead of just being one specific thing. Like if we were to make a graph of our favorite animal, we couldn't do intervals of animals, right? I mean, we could, I guess, but we'd have to go into like, it'd be difficult. But if we're just going with dogs or cats or horses or chickens, you know, they'd have each specific one would be on the bottom. So that'd be hard to do a histogram. But here where we're working with numbers or scores on a quiz, or maybe if we were looking at number of pets you have in your home, we could do intervals, things like that. So this would be better for a histogram. Any questions?
I kind of have one.
Yeah.
So if you kind of look down on the bottom of the graph, there are numbers like between 0, sorry, I can't speak.
You're good.
0 between 25. It doesn't give you a solid number. You kind of have to guess. Do some companies use this just to kind of sell stuff because it doesn't give you a real true number?
Right. So this would be more for like if you just want a broad overview of some situation. If you're wanting very specific data, you'd probably want to do more like what you're saying and say, okay, this many students scored exactly 23% or exactly 78%. You would want to be more specific and probably make a different type of graph. But for this case, since I just wanted a broad overview of how many scored between this and this, I did this as a histogram.
Thank you.
Of course. I got a baby crying. Can y'all hear that? Oh, buddy. You say hi? You say hi? Okay. All right. Well, if y'all have any questions, just let me know. I'm going to see what's going on with him, but thank y'all for coming. Thank you.